On September 1st, we've got a series of big astro events that really set the stage for a new phase. We've got Uranus and Taurus stationing retrograde on the 1st, then later that day, or possibly into the next day, depending on your time zone, Pluto re-enters Capricorn, and then we've got a new moon in Virgo on September 2nd as well. So here to discuss all of that and Pluto stay in Capricorn until November 19th. I've got Timothy Glenn here again for round 7 of our Pluto series. So welcome, Timothy.
Thank you. Yeah, this is going to be an interesting fall here in the Northern Hemisphere. Is that an
Definitely. Yeah, so I'm going to give you the floor to begin with. Where do you think we should start?
Okay, for those who haven't been with us for part 1, part 2, etc., we've been doing this series covering the long transit of Pluto from Capricorn into Aquarius, because it never just moves from one sign into another. It will always cross over the cusp at least 3 times. In this case, we get it 5 times, which is taking a little longer than usual. So we've got 3 under our belt now, but the 4th cross is coming here at the beginning of September because it's retrograding back into Capricorn for the last time for more than 2 centuries. And it's going to be in Aquarius for over 20 years now. But the old world of the Capricornian top-down authoritarian structures and so forth are in the process of being phased out of existence here. And aren't real happy about it. But meanwhile, all of this impetus here is really moving us forward because with Pluto becoming established in the sign of Aquarius, we are much more into the age of Aquarius. So this is the big picture, and we've got other fun things in the midst of this, but that's really the big context.
Right. And I find it interesting, too, that we've got these 2 outer planets making big moves on the same day, or the same 24 hours, we'll say, with Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, and then Pluto is leaving Aquarius. They're definitely linked, not just because it's happening in the same context, but there is this energy where we're really looking at the difference between Capricorn top down and Aquarius break free, revolution, all of that. So how are you viewing this next 2.5 months or so?
With great trepidation. It's been crazy enough anyway. With it, we are really into crunch time here. And a lot of us are really feeling it, especially when our own charts are being more directly affected than most.
Mm-hmm.
You and I did not get an exemption on that.
For those who don't know, we started this whole Pluto series because Tim's natal sun is at 1 Aquarius and my natal moon is at 1 Aquarius. And so that started the series, but we've been tracking everything as it goes. The Sabian symbol for where Pluto will be in Capricorn for the final round is only in the 29th degree, and rounding up, that one is Capricorn 30, a secret meeting of men responsible for executive decisions in world affairs. And so, I mean, that's the same spot where we had that July 21st full moon in Capricorn. And I mean, it's been kind of trippy to read the Sabian symbols. I mean, it almost looks like whoever's like the scriptwriter of reality has been like using the Sabian symbols as cliff notes or as an outline for kind of what's coming. But people have been asking me, wow, there's a lot of tyranny, there's a lot of this. Are we going to get all these lockdowns again? Are we going to get all of this stuff? And I'm like, we might, because it's kind of like last call for tyrants. But at the same time, the overall energies are not supportive of that.
Correct, because the bulk of the humans are just fed up with the nonsense of the old controllers, and it's so easy to see through the games now.
Uh-huh.
Because these people are nothing if not predictable.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just playing from the same old playbook. So,
Well, and that continues too, because that new moon in Virgo, the Sabian symbol, after the wedding, the groom snatches the veil away from his bride. So this isn't like, oh, there's like the kiss and the gentle moving of the veil. It's like, snatching it away. It kind of reminds me of the biblical story, right, with Jacob, where he thought he was marrying Rachel, but he got to marry her sister first. And so it's like something is not as it appears, but there's an unveiling that occurs. And that's right on the heels of these big shifts with Uranus and Pluto. So the harder they push, it's like the more obvious it becomes.
yeah. And unveiling. Well, the word apocalypse, that's unveiling.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're going to get some interesting perspectives and information and data points as we go through this adventure this fall, because, with Jupiter being in the midst of Gemini, having just been activated by Mars, it's like, okay, we don't just want a bunch of information. We want to know the truth behind it. We want to see a bigger picture.
Mm-hmm. And you were wanting to talk a little more about Jupiter squaring Saturn, because while that went exact at the time of the recent full moon in Aquarius on August 19th, that's a longer transit. So do you want to share some information about that?
Yeah, because so many people still think that when a certain aspect happens one time, that means it's all done.
Yeah.
But especially dealing with outer planets, well, they're going to go back and forth, and it's going to take the better part of a year to get a major transit done. Mm-hmm. So, well, just to go off into the weeds for a moment, you still hear people talking about the U.S. Pluto return as though it's something that happened years ago and it's done. But with Pluto going back into that anaretic degree of Capricorn is the last call, last ditch desperation effort of the old controllers before decentralization really kicks in. Wow. It's yes, okay. This is sorry, I'm getting Mercury retrograded here. But yeah, I actually wrote down the date so I wouldn't forget them. Okay, 8/20. Yeah, August 20th. Exact square of Jupiter and Saturn. And then it's going to come back, hey, just in time for Christmas this year, right? It's going to come back over to retrograde. And then it won't be till the middle of June when we get that third cross. So just, buckle up or just let go, because this is going to get really, really wild. But what I'm looking forward to are some of the fun facets of this, like, Jupiter versus Saturn, as it were. How about lawful versus legal? Like here in the U.S., okay, you've got the founding documents like the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution itself, and the Bill of Rights, and the Federalist Papers. Now, we could consider that's lawful. Anything that is in harmony with that is considered lawful. Things can be legal, because actually, we're no longer living in that old republic. We're in this corporatocracy. And so the corporate codes and rules and regulations and statutes and so forth, so much of that is not lawful. It's boggling. So we're really going to see that as part of the struggle here of people waking up and realize, wow, we have been so manipulated, and so we've been the sheeple and we've been fleeced. People are going to be insisting a lawful system without a bunch of legalese.
One of the things on a personal level that I was thinking about for individuals, because that's more, what are we going to see with governments, right? But is kind of like Santa Claus energy, right? So you've got like the jovial energy of Jupiter, kind of like, oh, the jolly ho, ho, ho. But then you've got the making a list and checking it twice energy of Saturn. So it's kind of interesting that another exact square is going to be happening around the time of Christmas, because again, just those energies are kind of up, but it is kind of finding the balance between jovial goodwill and like, oh yes, all is good, and versus like making a list, checking it twice, who's been naughty or nice. And I think as the desperation increases, we're likely to see a lot naughtier kind of stuff, but then also maybe some surprising niceness, like some surprises, like people that are like, oh, Santa Claus doesn't really exist, but it's like that spirit of energy sometimes comes through, like It's a Wonderful Life or something. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Right. In fact, big picture, as we've discussed many times, we feel really positive about where this is all going.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, it's not real comfy, cushy going through the process, but it's really shedding the old constriction of the old system.
Mm-hmm.
And for ourselves personally, one of the ways this can show up is the Jupiter type of spontaneity against the programming of Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
Because we may find ourselves in a situation where, wow, wait a minute, I always thought those were my thoughts. Well, yeah, ever since I was 12 and the teacher said that, and God, I always felt those were my feelings. Yeah, ever since you were 7 and that happened on the playground. So we develop these programs in us, and of course we just follow along through the socialization process, and so much of what we think is really us really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to find out as we go that we still have programming. And once we recognize it as a program, it's lost most of its power right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was talking with somebody yesterday about how, if you're dealing with like a narcissistic person or an abuser or a psychopath or something, like there's a lot of gaslighting that occurs, but there comes a point in the relationship where kind of once you see it, it's like you can't unsee it, and you're always aware that, oh, okay, this dynamic's happening. And it feels like, I mean, we're still in Mercury retrograde as we're recording this, obviously, with all of our issues here, but that Sabian symbol was the carrier pigeon delivering its message at the end of Mercury retrograde. So there is this process that's going on that will have just completed a couple days before the Pluto moving back into Capricorn, Uranus stationing retrograde, then the new moon, and then we get Mars entering Cancer on the 4th, but of course always Mars acts early, so it just feels like the beginning of September really is entering a new phase.
Yeah, it is. And especially since we're going to have Pluto making its last stay in Capricorn, which is actually relatively brief, considering the 248 Earth-year orbit of Saturn. So it's going to be like jam-packed. And, well, the old corporatocracy, I think, is just about finished. And so we'll see all kinds of fun surprises in this, too. Because, with when things got kicked off with Mars crossing over Uranus and Algol on the same day, well, we did a special video on that.
Right. Yeah, I'll link that below for anybody that didn't see that, but that happened on July 15th. But again, Mars often acts early. So we were thinking the 12th or the 13th. And certainly there were some things that occurred at that time. And yeah, again, just how precise everything is, because that 24 Taurus, so very close to the 26th Taurus where that event occurred, was Trump's midheaven, and Requiem was right there. So yeah, I mean, the sky really is kind of narrating a lot of these events, and it's just a question of exactly how do they play out, especially when you throw Uranus into the mix.
Right. And one of the ways I often like to put it with Mars is Mars jumps the gun.
Yep.
And then on the 13th, well, we had something going on with some guns, so that was pretty wild. But that whole adventure with Uranus doing a full triple transit over that fixed star Algol, the ghoul, the demon star, Medusa's head, etc., that Well, as Yogi Berra often said, it ain't over till it's over.
Mm-hmm. And when does that end?
Well, that won't be till like early May of 2025.
Yeah.
This is a long process. So yeah, it got jump started with a big bang there in July, but it just happens to be in the middle of October that it's coming back over. Uranus is coming back over Algol in retrograde motion. So yeah, looking at mid-October, gee, isn't there some other stuff going on there? Maybe Jupiter's going retrograde a few days before that, and on and on. It's like, it's just so jam-packed with crazy stuff right now.
Yeah. Well, and where Jupiter goes retrograde is right on the US natal Mars. And so and then we haven't even gotten into eclipse season. So we talked about the new moon in Virgo on September 2nd, but September 17th begins a whole new series of eclipse season where we get the first one in Pisces. And that, I mean, that's part of my optimism of kind of like where things are eventually going, because while the North Node has been in Aries for, since July of last year, we've got this new energy that's just starting to kind of flicker onto the scene. And so that Pisces eclipse likely to be pretty confusing, pretty distorted, because it takes place right by Neptune in Pisces. So extra strong. But what do you see with the eclipses?
Oh, especially, we have Aries involved in one of them, because remember in the spring we had a whole bunch of Aries energy there.
Mm-hmm.
But the Aries energy wasn't done for the year. So that's, it's like just spin the wheel, roll the dice, see what comes up. It's like, this is just going to be totally bonkers out here.
Yeah.
Within us, we look at where do these things occur in our charts. So where is this kind of activation going to occur for us personally? That helps us quite a bit.
Yeah. So Pisces 26 degrees is the Sabian symbol. So it's in the 25th degree of Pisces, watching the very thin moon crescent appearing at sunset. Different people realize that the time has come to go ahead with their different projects. And Dane Rudyard has this as the fallacy of totalitarianism. So that's like baked right into the eclipse, which I find interesting. And Mars squares the nodal axis just ahead of that. So on the 16th, there's the exact, but I mean, that's still going to be in effect. So we're getting, this Aries, Libra, peace, war, that tension with the god of war squaring it at the same time that there's like the fallacy of totalitarianism. So yeah, it's definitely, it just seems like everything is very packed in terms of very key transits.
Yeah. So this adventure is going to be carrying on well into 2025 here, because the astrological weather is still not calm into the early months of 2025. So no, we'll just roll with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, for ourselves, going back to the Jupiter square Saturn, it's like, okay, do we want to be free? Do we want to be spontaneous? Or do we want to be expansive and want to grow and have success and all kinds of opportunities? We want to do that stuff. Well, there's this brick wall of the old world that we used to call reality, but maybe it isn't. Maybe that was all illusion.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, if we look at our opportunities to choose the spontaneous, in the moment type of energy, rather than following something that we're doing just by rote, that's going to shift ourselves immensely.
Yeah, well, and also again with that Jupiter square Saturn energy, we've got the optimism of Jupiter, optimistic expansion, and then the pessimistic glasses half empty contraction of Saturn. That's a little oversimplified, but I feel like that's what we're going to be working with. That's that friction that could create a pearl, right? It could create something if we learn to to work with that energy where it's not just Pollyanna, like, oh, everything's great. I don't need to look at anything. I mean, Saturn is going to bring the magnifying glass, but at the same time, if you're looking to expand, then using that magnifying glass to find the little cracks in the foundation so that your expansion can be that much bigger. I feel like that's a positive use of that energy.
Sure. In fact, we can also look at the Saturn part of it as just practical realism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Jupiter wants to do everything. And whoop, yeah, that's all great. But it's like Saturn will be saying, all right, that's cool, but here's the way it is right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and also Jupiter being in its fall in Gemini too, it's like, oh, there's a lot of big words, right? There's a lot of big talk. And Saturn's kind of like, okay, yeah, let's bring that down to earth. Let's dial that back to be a little more realistic, which doesn't always feel good if you're like all up here, woo, you don't necessarily want to have somebody raining on your parade, but at the same time, in order to really have a much greater success, much bigger Jupiter kind of experience, you need to ground it. You need to troubleshoot.
Yeah, and there is a little bit of a caveat of getting carried away with all that Jupiter whoop-de-doo stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We've got an old saying, what goes up must come down. And that reminds me of a little adventure I had in earlier years in life here when I realized my life was just bonkers. Like, this isn't working. And so I sat down and I actually did a graph of my emotional states, through the months. And it was like one of those, okay, you got the line in the middle and the graph is going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, and just jagged. And I, man, this is just no way to live. And then I realized, okay, what goes up must come down. So it was peaks and pits and peaks and pits. Well, I was creating the pits by pouring so much into those peaks.
Mm.
But the only way to shift out of that cycle is when you're on the way back up, and nobody wants to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So they want to go back up to the peak. Oh, whoopie-doo. Well, okay, just create another pit. You want to stop it then? Not going to work. So I decided then that I would rather have a graph where you got that line in the middle and it'd just be like a sine wave.
Mm-hmm.
Nice and easy. And after a while, when I look back at all that, I realized that if you're doing the jagged peaks and pits and all like that, that actually brings that center line slowly downward.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing the sine wave, it slowly moves upward.
Mm-hmm.
So we could do that kind of stuff with this.
Yeah. Well, and that's what I appreciate about astrology, being able to kind of look at the trends, right? So many people get caught into the one event or the one exact transit or the one thing. And it's like, no, actually things, they move in cycles and they cycle back around. And sometimes it's the same players and sometimes you throw somebody else into the mix. And I mean, it's much more like music that way than just a straight line.
Yeah, this straight linear approach that we've been trained to have, especially in this society. It's like, no, I don't think that the universe is really strictly linear. Especially if you get into non-linear math, it's like, oh, wow, okay. Yeah, I think maybe we weren't told the whole story in school. What do you think?
So that said, I mean, I have some dates highlighted as kind of particularly intense. And I mean, the way I think of it is more like a weather report. It's kind of like you bring an umbrella or, wear your rain jacket or something. Don't be caught off guard, right? So not necessarily fearful or like absolutely on that date this is going to happen, although it has been tracking pretty consistently with that. So after that eclipse on the 17th, then we've got the sun entering Libra on the 22nd, so change of seasons. And then that same day, Venus squaring Pluto. So Venus in the final degree of Libra, squaring Pluto, final degree of Capricorn, and then Venus enters Scorpio. So that's another one of these days where it's like, oh, yeah, we get a change of season. We get, Venus changing signs, but it changes signs with this, big tension with Pluto, which can play out as values in addition to relationships.
Yeah, in fact, what got activated in my mind there was like, well, just approaching the scheduled election in the US here, we're all going to have Mars coming up into Leo, which means he's going to be opposite our good friend Pluto over there. So, of course, what's right in front of Leo? That's Cancer. So when he gets to the end of Cancer, he's at that Anaretic degree exactly opposite Pluto, and then goes to, across the cusp. So it's like, oh my God, it's everywhere you look. Okay, there's something that goes, ooh, whoa, okay. And again, we've talked about this before. I would not be at all surprised if the United States actually had an election.
Mm-hmm. You mean that it's canceled?
Canceled or postponed or disrupted. They might even start it and it gets disrupted. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the energies do suggest something like that could happen, but equally so many people are talking about that and expecting, oh, it's not going to go smoothly, that it might go surprisingly smoothly, like in a weird, unexpected way. So the energies are just very distorted and odd and lots of surprises. So, yeah.
But also, big picture again, we have the three outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, all shifting signs within a very brief period here. Mm-hmm. And I haven't looked back to see how many thousands of years it's been, but it's been a long time since all three of them made ingresses in that short a period of time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and next year, which is what you're really talking about with Neptune and Uranus, but also Saturn is going to be leaving Pisces really close to the same time frame as Neptune. That's going to be interesting energy there.
Yeah. In fact, that's a Saturn-Neptune conjunction at the beginning of Aries.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's hard to predict because those are very different energies, but Saturn will have spent all this time in Pisces. So it's like, is there, has something been learned? Has this power structure been dissolved enough that when Saturn moves into Aries, it actually starts something new? And does Neptune, that is very strong at that 29th degree of Pisces, does it kind of take a hit when it moves into Aries? That one is hard to say, but I mean, I know Saturn's not an outer planet, but it is a significantly slow transit period, 28 years, give or take. So I do feel like that brings an extra energy there. So then we have four things really in harmony, actually.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is going to be a wild ride here. So how do you feel about as we go into this on the personal level? What kind of adjustments are you finding people are looking at making? Because we're going to have to stay on our toes and be aware of what's going on here.
Yeah, so a lot of relationship changes. That's really the big thing that I'm hearing about. And in some cases, it's very Jupiter in Gemini kind of thing, where it's like the big picture worldview based on information, but people are, everybody has their little algorithm that tells them what the world is. And if you're not actively kind of selecting what you want your world to be, then you might get defaulted into something different. And so it seems like there's a lot of tension with kind of different levels of awareness. And there was an interesting one, Sabian symbol. Yeah, so the full moon in Aries on October 17th, the Sabian symbol actually reflects this, the possibility for man to gain experience at two levels of being. And so, and I've been having all these dreams where, I mean, dream after dream after dream, where I'm shown two different timelines. And sometimes it's me in the dream, like I'm viewing myself from above, and there's a version of me lying down over here, and there's a version of me lying down over here, and they're very different lives. And then also seeing things like on the world stage, kind of like if this, then this, if this, then this, and like having to choose those things. But to varying degrees, the people that I'm talking with are also noticing that. I mean, people are saying, "Oh, I think I jumped a timeline yesterday." And like all the signals are there where we're like, "Oh, wait a minute, like that doesn't match up anymore." And wait a minute, like we had plans, but it's not on my calendar anymore. Or this person doesn't recognize me, even though we talked like last week. And so, I mean, it's a weird reality right now.
Yeah, and we are making a lot of these timeline shifts.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times when you might be remembering something and remembering it very clearly, and then all of a sudden you realize that has absolutely nothing to do with the reality that's here.
Mm-hmm.
Whoa. Whoa. And another thing with, well, since we're dealing with the very end of Pluto in Capricorn, and Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, and we've got Saturn being squared by Jupiter. Another thing that we might find not only out there in the big picture, but within ourselves, as you alluded to earlier here, there will be new boundary lines.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes with people that have been in our lives or might be in our lives, etc. Because we're going to really step into a more user-friendly reality, which means that if anything in our lives is not honoring us, then it's just not here.
Yeah, it's like it's just gone. Yeah. The other thing that I am hearing from a lot of people, I mean, like this is a very common topic in sessions, is issues with addictions and distraction. And I feel like that's Neptune in the 29th degree. I mean, I've been anticipating that, but just a lot of people, as the world is getting so stressful, you know, people are reaching for those crutches, and the old crutches often are not working anymore, either because you need so much of them in order to tune out, because as even though everything's getting more and more intense, the veils are getting thinner. And so it's like more difficult to ignore. And I'm finding that the key is really choosing where you put your focus. And some of that is dreams. Some of that is just, how do you feel in your body? You know, what is your body telling you? If you're like electrocuted every time that you're talking about something, or every time that you get a text from somebody, like that's a warning system. And Black Moon Lilith is still very active. I mean, it's a very erratic point, but there are a lot of times throughout this fall where Black Moon Lilith is going to be a big deal, including that October 2nd eclipse, which is conjunct Black Moon Lilith in Libra. So right around 10 Libra. So yeah, paying attention to the body as like a biofeedback machine. When all the crazy stuff is going around up here and you can't figure it out, your body is telling you, hey, slow down, or remove yourself from this equation.
Yeah, and sometimes we're told to slow down and we don't do it, and then the body kind of forces the issue.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, lots of foot injuries, knee injuries, falls. But if you pan back, I mean, at least I know for myself, I always pay attention if I have like a freak accident, and, you know, where like it shouldn't have been able to occur, but it does. And in my case, it often occurs in a doorway. So it's like, how symbolic is that? Where it's like, oh, I'm crossing the threshold and now things are not the same anymore. is like checking in with yourself and seeing, okay, yeah, they're not the same. Are they better? Because sometimes it's painful. Like change can be painful because we're so stuck that we need to be kind of jerked out of the old habits. But if you check in and see, how is it feeling? Who are you connecting with? How are you expanding? Sometimes it was like a course correction, maybe a hard course correction, but it may be getting people onto the trajectory that they really are most naturally meant to live on.
And when we look at some of these aspects that we've been talking about, if we look at where it occurs in our chart, like what house is this in? So what part of our life is this going to play out in? Because that's different for everybody.
Right.
So, yeah, stay on our toes because
Yeah.
in some pretty tricky territory right now. So many of these energies can play out in so many different ways. So the universe may surprise us.
So I just find it interesting, especially this time period. It's like the very end of mutables, like all the mutables. So Gemini, Sagittarius, Virgo, Pisces, like all of that. We've got Neptune up there, 29th degree. We're going to have Mars moving from Gemini into Cancer. We've got, all of this energy there in the late mutables, but then also in the late cardinal signs with Pluto in the final degree of Capricorn. And then also all the late degrees of the fixed signs with Uranus doing that triple cross up there at the very end of Taurus. So yeah, it's like if you've got anything on the cusps, you're pretty much being activated all over the place.
Yeah. So maybe not everybody's going to get one of these interesting transits happening on a really tender part of their chart, but a lot of us are getting that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, yeah. Well, as we say, buckle up or just let go, but trust the process.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing, because you had asked things that are coming up, the other thing that I'm really noticing are composite charts of relationships. So, I mean, you need, actual birth data for each person to really make that accurate, but the transits to composite charts are very telling. So even if the individuals, when you look at what's going on for the individuals, it's like, oh, I don't know, you're not really being hit that hard, but the relationship is like bang on with, some kind of Uranus transit or Pluto transit or something like that. That's playing out in a very palpable way.
Yeah, and for those who aren't familiar with composite charts or synastry, when we look at relationship astrology, like with synastry, we do two wheels, one within and one outside. So you put your wheel on the inside, then the other person on the outside. Well, how do their energies play through your chart? And then do it the other way around. That's synastry. But the composite is like, okay, there's your sun, the other person's sun, go to the midpoint. Mm-hmm. Your moon, their moon, go to the midpoint. So the whole thing is the midpoints. Like, where do these two people really need to go together to work as a team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I've been really amazed actually at just how precise it does show up in like the chart of the relationship itself, which would be the composite.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. So many astrologers who do relationship astrology, they'll do either synastry or composite, but they don't look at both, which I've never quite understood.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the progressions too, like how are you evolving over time? How is the relationship evolving over time? You're still going to have the original, you're still going to have the natal, but yeah, it just, I mean, the more you look at it, the more you see, okay, yeah, there is this influence happening, and kind of being aware of what that is can help either like defuse a tense situation, because it's like, oh, okay, Mars is passing over that point, just give it 2 weeks, you'll be okay. Or it's like, oh no, this is, getting the quintuple cross by Pluto, and anything hidden is going to come up, and the relationship is either going to be completely transformed or it's going to end. Like there's not a lot of wiggle room for that.
And since, among other things, Pluto deals with volcanism, sometimes the revelations can be pretty eruptive.
Yeah. So yeah, moving through Libra season, I'm anticipating that the relationship stuff is going to be up even more. And again, not necessarily that it has to be the end of relationships, but some sort of major transformation is likely.
Yeah, because if we don't make adjustments, we're trying to carry older patterns into a new field, and it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in a very different field right now. I mean, you just sent that email out today, and I was like, oh, distortion field? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So Tim's referring to something that I put on my blog yesterday, just that a heads up that we're in a distortion field. Not only is Mercury retrograde, but with that 29-degree Pisces Neptune, it's like, ooh, the propaganda and like the confusion, the miasma is just like at peak effects. And again, realizing that like not everybody is experiencing this the same way, and sometimes you're not, somebody's not corresponding with you, and it may have nothing at all to do with you. Like maybe the emails aren't going through, or maybe they're temporarily in a different timeline, or I mean, there's so many distorting factions right now that it's not wise to take everything personally.
Not that it ever was.
No, but especially not now.
Right. Yeah, because a lot of that can happen because people hit a point in their experience where, man, they're getting slammed. And yeah, okay, maybe they're not getting back to you right away.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, yeah, they could be laid up right now. Whatever. So, just understanding that everybody's going through their own experience, and that, in fact, it was Robin Williams years ago who said that everybody you meet is fighting a battle that you know nothing about.
Mm-hmm.
So in all cases, be kind.
Yeah. And the other thing that I find very helpful is just gratitude, I mean, especially if you are getting into the anxiety, because you can't be worried and grateful simultaneously. Like if you're in that worry, and you go, oh, okay, pause. What am I grateful for? And come up with 5 things. Usually come up with a lot more than 5 once you start doing it, but it shifts the energy. It like pulls you out of that anxiety timeline. And I mean, there certainly is enough stuff out there to grab your attention and make you very, very afraid. Like that's the machine is trying to do that right now, generate anger, generate fear. But if you step back and look at the gratitude and look for the beauty, look for the grace, it's also there.
Always.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And another thing about the Jupiter square Saturn, the first 2 exact squares occur with the Pisces and Gemini energy. But when we get into mid-June, that shift moves up into Aries and Cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So it ends on a different note.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of this stuff is shifting. And that's where I think it's helpful, again, to realize like bigger trajectory. I mean, because we talked a little bit in our Mars conjunct Uranus video about how Mars is going to be moving into into Leo and then retrograding back and spending a lot of time in Cancer, going all the way back to 17 Cancer, I think it is, and then stationing direct not until next year. So, I mean, this energy, this extra hyper emotionalism, right? Like, again, people are trying to prey on the emotions, and that 29 Capricorn Pluto, that corporatocracy, the top down energy. One of the ways to get people to go against each other is to play on the emotions. But with Mars there, that's also willpower, right? That's also our personal will. And so you can choose to some extent. I mean, you can't totally ignore your emotions, but um, it's a small shift to go from anger and frustration to determination. Like that's not that big of a leap, but the trajectory can be very, very different.
And there's a difference between our feelings and our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
The feelings are where we really want to focus because our emotional pattern, how we're emoting the feelings and expressing it, that's often influenced more by our programming.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go deeper into the actual feelings and forget the programming there, just be with the feelings. It's like, okay, with this feeling, where do we want to go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and also that's raw energy, right? It's raw energy. And with Mars, their raw energy that is directed by the power of will, you're more into magical territory.
Sure. And Mars can also be our zeal and enthusiasm.
Mm-hmm.
I like that word enthusiasm because the actual etymology is entheoism, which I translate in a godlike state of being.
Oh, interesting.
It's fun to play with the words. And that's another thing that's going to come out as we really get into the lawful versus legal thing here, because that language that we call legalese is just a bunch of grammar fraud. And we'll see all the different ways that word games have been played to trick people into allowing themselves to be dominated by that dysfunctional system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But we're into the time of decentralization now.
So, what, if anything, do you anticipate for October 11th, October 12th, depending on time zone, Pluto stationing direct in Capricorn? I mean, this is kind of an unusual situation where you get Pluto moving into Capricorn, but it never leaves that final degree. And so it's not like you're looking at, oh, okay, in this degree, it has, kind of this flavor. But what are you seeing as, I mean, is it like a political earthquake or, some kind of like foundation shaking change around the mid-month?
Yes, definitely. Especially since we're talking about the last part of the Pluto return for the U.S. And what happens in the U.S., of course, is going to just echo out into the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And I see that it's going to be just this gigantic shift.
Yeah.
So we'll just see how it plays out.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have an emotional investment in any specific outcome there. So I just trust that everything's going to come out the way it's going to come out. It's going to be like the new Earth anyway. So chill out.
And I was going to say, for people that don't know, the U.S. natal Pluto is 27 Capricorn. So that's the Pluto return that we're talking about. That has been creeping up for years, went exact in 2022, but it's still in a pretty tight orb. I mean, 2 degrees is not a big orb. And for a while, I was thinking of when Pluto re-enters Aquarius on November 19th, that's the end of the U.S. Pluto return. I feel like I want to amend that and say it's the end of the destructive phase of the U.S. Pluto return, and it feels like then we start to enter more the regeneration phase.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a lot of rebuilding because we can focus on the deconstruction that's going on. And yeah, it's kind of spectacular. But okay, now that it's been deconstructed, what are we going to do? We're going to reconstruct.
Yeah. So
that's where the fun begins.
Well, and that's in our personal lives as well. So for anybody who has been getting rocked by Pluto, I always say that, in the beginning, especially if you resist it, it's very destructive. It's like, oh, that's got to go. This is crumbling. This is exploding. But by the end of the transit, you do get that regeneration. You get that rebirth. It's the planet of death and rebirth. And so I want to end on more of an optimistic note because that is the energy that we're moving into.
Yeah. And I encourage people to look for the signs, the little indicators of something new that can be introduced here.
Mm-hmm.
Because some really, really cool stuff is right here. We're looking at it, and sometimes even the mainstream propaganda channels have to talk about it. And so it's there, but why don't we flow our energy into that instead of focusing so much on the deconstruction phase?
Yeah. Yeah. But I do think it's going to be pretty crazy looking. Like if you're not looking for those little indicators of, oh, what's coming into being, what's rebirthing, then this period, 2.5 month period, it could look kind of scary and like, oh my God, the whole world is ending. No, the old world is ending. Like the old things. And Pluto doesn't just indiscriminately destroy. Pluto destroys the things that are standing in the way of new life, the things that are standing in the way of growth.
Yeah. And Saturn does that too.
Mm-hmm.
Saturn is like the gardener who does pruning to get the old stuff out of the way so the new growth can come out.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, if we're identifying with something that's getting pruned, well, okay, we're going to feel that, and then we might just call time out and say, ooh, well, maybe that wasn't really part of the real me.
Mm-hmm. One other thing that we haven't mentioned in this video is Chiron. So the wounded healer. Chiron station retrograde on July 26th, right around 23 of Aries, but is moving back to 19 Aries, which is the same spot as the Sun Moon Chiron exactly conjunct to the minute eclipse on April 8th, but the US natal Chiron 20 Aries. And so that's going to get 2 more crosses in the next 6 months. So that's just, the odds of that happening simultaneously to the US Pluto return. But again, with Chiron, it's painful for those first few crosses, but then by the end you get healing. So we're having this convergence of very intense energy, but ultimately what we're looking at is healing and regeneration.
Yeah, and that's another one where people tend to think, oh, that already happened.
Yeah.
But it ain't over till it's over.
No, it's very, very much in effect all the rest of this year. That is going to be very tightly in effect, including it will be right there on the US natal Chiron, right around the time that Pluto moves into Aquarius for, final round here. So just a heads up that stuff could be more intense. Like it's going to get worse before it gets better, but there will be those little nuggets of real positive signs and synchronicities pointing towards the new.
Yeah. And if on any level, to any degree, we've been allowing that external matrix world to shape our picture of reality, we may be wise to let a lot of that get reprogrammed.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of stuff inside ourselves, it's like, oh, well, click on uninstall.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're getting kind of close towards time here. Anything other than that you want to really leave people with?
I think the most important thing is what goes on within us, because we do affect the field.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people want to look only at the external events, especially like, the political and all that rubbish out there. But none of that could exist without us. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, we are the creator. It's just that we've allowed our consciousness to be hijacked for God knows how long. But we're waking up to this now. And so, yeah, all right, let's focus on the reality that we would prefer living. Mm-hmm. And look for those little indicators, because a lot of that is coming through the cracks right now. Mm-hmm. Because the matrix program is crashing. And
yeah.
Well, have faith.
Yeah. And I feel like that's also the energy, like the silver lining of Mars moving through Cancer is that we're going to get these beautiful trines with Mars trine Saturn, Mars trine Neptune, and so you get this builder energy, you get this mystical energy, and the ability to bring that spiritual energy into form. Again, it's that magical energy, that directed raw power of the feelings and of the emotions of where do you want to focus this? And I think we can just focus it on bringing something really truly beautiful and magical into being.
Yeah. And since right now Toto is pulling the curtain aside, it's like, well, somebody's saying pay no attention to that silly old man behind the curtain. It's kind of hard not to notice at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I didn't get into all of the Sabian symbols, but just reading them, it's like, oh my goodness, like there's a story that is unfolding here, very much about unveiling things. But again, at the end of, if we're using the Wizard of Oz as an analogy, I mean, Dorothy finds her own power. Like she finds that she always had home within her. She always had that ability. She didn't need the external wizard. She didn't need the external witch. She had her friends, and she was able to stand sovereign in her being. So I do feel like, and wherever this is hitting in our charts, there's so much of the same message coming from so many different places that it is going to have this resurgence of our own sovereignty, our own personal power. And again, how do you want to use that?
Right. And for everybody to remember that you're the only one running your reality.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, how do people find you?
Soulpurposereadings.com.
All right. Great. And we will be back next time, a little before the October 11th, October 12th, stationing direct in Capricorn. So I'm sure we'll have lots of other context to be exploring that. But in the meantime, you take care and everybody else take care, and we'll catch you soon.
Hey, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Oh my goodness. On September 1st, we've got a series of powerful shifts on, oh my God, this is going to be one of those days. All right, here we go. All right, here we go. September 1st begins,
Mercury Retrograde strikes again.
All right, here we go.